Welcome to my channel Starwire Daily. Please share and subscribe and press the bell icon for new updates. October 12th, 1997. A beautiful Sunday afternoon on the California coast. The sun is setting over Monterey Bay, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Below, the Pacific Ocean stretches out like a sheet of glass. It's the kind of moment John Denver lived for. Peaceful, majestic, pure. But in less than 60 seconds, that piece would shatter into 1,000 pieces, and one of America's most beloved voices would be silenced forever. For over 2 decades, the official story seemed straightforward. A plane crash, mechanical failure, a tragic accident. But here's what they didn't tell you. What really happened in those final moments wasn't just an accident. It was a cascade of shocking decisions, hidden secrets, and unanswered questions that the public was never meant to discover. And today, we're finally pulling back the curtain on the full, heartbreaking truth. But before we dive into that fateful day, we need to understand who John Denver really was. Because the man behind Take Me Home, Country Roads was so much more complex than the wholesome image America fell in love with. Born Henry John Duchendor Jr. in Roswell, New Mexico, in 1943, John Denver wasn't just a singer. He was a phenomenon. With his round glasses, shaggy blonde hair, and that infectious smile, he became the face of 1970s optimism. Songs like Rocky Mountain High, Annie's Song, and Sunshine on My Shoulders weren't just hits. They were anthems that defined a generation's relationship with nature, love, and simplicity. By the mid-70s, John Denver was everywhere. Television specials, movie roles, environmental activism. He sold over 33 million records, earned multiple Grammy Awards, and even received the Country Music Association's Entertainer of the Year award. The man was untouchable. But here's what the cameras didn't show you. Behind that sunny disposition was a man wrestling with profound loneliness. Despite selling out stadiums and having millions of fans, John struggled with the very thing his music celebrated most: connection. His first marriage to Annie Martell, the woman who inspired his beautiful ballad Annie's Song, crumbled under the weight of fame and his constant touring. Their divorce in 1982 devastated him. Friends say he never quite recovered from losing Annie, even though he remarried twice more. Then there was the drinking. Oh, the drinking. This is where the golden image started to crack. Throughout the 80s and 90s, John Denver was arrested multiple times for drunk driving. Not once, not twice, but multiple times. In 1993, he crashed his Porsche into a tree. In 1994, another DUI arrest. The pattern was undeniable, and it painted a picture of a man spiraling, trying to numb pain that his music could no longer heal. But John had one escape that even alcohol couldn't provide: flying. He was obsessed with it. Absolutely obsessed. He'd been piloting planes since the mid-70s, and it wasn't just a hobby. It was his sanctuary. Up there, above the clouds, away from the pressure and the pain, John Denver felt free. He collected planes the way some people collect stamps. By 1997, he owned multiple aircraft, and he was always looking for the next thrill, the next machine that would take him higher. That's where the Long Easy comes in. Now, this wasn't your typical Cessna or Piper. The Long Easy was an experimental aircraft, a home-built plane designed for speed and efficiency, but notorious for being tricky to handle. It was a small, lightweight craft with a pusher propeller in the back and an unconventional design that required serious skill to operate. John had only purchased this particular Long Easy a few weeks before that October day. He'd logged fewer than 5 hours of flight time in it. Let that sink in. One of the most complex, temperamental aircraft you can fly, and he'd barely gotten to know it. And here's where things get really interesting. The plane had a critical design flaw that John Denver should never have had to deal with. The fuel selector valve, the switch that lets you change between fuel tanks, wasn't in the normal position. In most planes, it's right there on the dashboard where you can reach it easily. But in this Long Easy, because of a custom modification, the valve was located behind the pilot's left shoulder. You literally had to turn around, reach back, and flip a switch you couldn't see while trying to maintain control of the aircraft. Multiple aviation experts would later testify that this was an incredibly dangerous design. Even experienced pilots found it awkward and risky. But John? He knew about it. He'd been warned about it, and he flew anyway. October 12th started like any other Sunday for John Denver. He was in Pacific Grove, California, staying in a friend's home. He woke up excited because he was scheduled to take his Long Easy up for a touch-and-go practice session at the Monterey Peninsula Airport. Touch-and-goes are simple exercises. You take off, circle around, land, and immediately take off again without stopping. It's how pilots maintain their skills. Witnesses at the airport later said John seemed in good spirits. He did his pre-flight check, chatted with other pilots, and climbed into the cockpit around 5:12 p.m. The sun was beginning its descent, casting that magical golden hour light that photographers dream about. Perfect flying weather, calm winds, clear skies. Everything seemed perfect. He took off smoothly, climbing to about 300 feet over the bay. According to the flight pattern, he should have circled back toward the airport for his touch-and-go landing. But something went wrong. At approximately 5:28 p.m., John Denver's Long Easy suddenly pitched nose down and began diving toward the water. No distress call, no mayday, just a sickening plunge from the sky. The plane hit the surface of Monterey Bay at devastating speed, cartwheeling across the water before sinking almost immediately. The impact was catastrophic. Fishermen and beachgoers watched in horror, unable to comprehend what they'd just witnessed. Within minutes, emergency responders rushed to the scene. The Coast Guard, local dive teams, everyone scrambled to find survivors. But when they pulled the wreckage from the water, there was no hope. John Denver, just 53 years old, was gone. Now here's where the mystery deepens, and where the official story starts to fall apart under scrutiny. The National Transportation Safety Board launched an immediate investigation, and what they found was absolutely shocking. First, the toxicology reports came back clean. No alcohol, no drugs, nothing in John Denver's system that would impair his judgment. Despite his history with drinking, on that day, he was completely sober. So what happened? The NTSB discovered that John had taken off with insufficient fuel. The right fuel tank was nearly empty, and he was running primarily on the left tank. At some point during the flight, that left tank ran low, and the engine began to sputter. John needed to switch tanks immediately. But remember that fuel selector valve behind his left shoulder? This is where everything went horribly, terribly wrong. Investigators believe that when John reached back to flip the fuel switch, he accidentally pressed on the right rudder pedal. In a small, light aircraft like the Long Easy, even a slight pressure on the rudder can cause a dramatic change in direction. The plane likely banked hard right, and John, twisted around in his seat, trying to reach the valve, couldn't correct it in time. The aircraft entered an uncontrollable dive, and at just 300 feet above the water, there simply wasn't enough altitude to recover. Think about those final seconds. John Denver, the man who sang about sunshine and mountains and the beauty of flight, realizing what was happening. The ground, or in this case, the water, rushing up toward him. No time to radio for help. No time to say goodbye. Just the terrible, awful understanding that this was the end. The NTSB officially ruled it as pilot error combined with a poor fuel management and that dangerous valve placement. But here's what makes this story even more tragic, even more preventable. John Denver never should have been flying that plane. Not that day. Not with so little experience in that specific aircraft. See, the Federal Aviation Administration has something called currency requirements. To carry passengers or to fly certain aircraft, you need to maintain specific flight hours and recent experience. Multiple sources close to John revealed after the accident that he'd been cutting corners. He was so eager to fly, so desperate for that freedom, that he sometimes ignored safety protocols that could have saved his life. And the plane itself? That Long Easy had a history. The previous owner had also struggled with the fuel valve placement. There were recommendations to move it, to modify it, to make it safer. But it never happened. John bought the plane as is, fully aware of the issue, and decided he could handle it. You know, there's something profoundly sad about a man who spent his entire life celebrating the beauty of the world, only to have that world take him in such a violent, sudden way. John Denver preached environmental conservation. He testified before Congress about protecting our planet. He sang about rocky mountains and country roads and the simple joy of being alive. And in the end, it was his own hubris, his own refusal to respect the dangers of the sky he loved so much that killed him. But the story doesn't end with a crash. Oh no, because what happened after John Denver's death revealed even more layers to this tragedy. His estate became a battlefield. John had been married 3 times, had 2 adopted children with his first wife, Annie, and was in a relationship with another woman at the time of his death. The fights over his fortune, over his music catalog, over his legacy, it got ugly. Really ugly. Suddenly, the man who'd represented peace and harmony became the center of bitter legal disputes that dragged on for years. And then there were the conspiracy theories. Because of course there were. Some people refused to believe it was just an accident. Was John Denver's plane sabotaged? Was there a cover-up? Wild theories circulated online, with some claiming that John's environmental activism had made him enemies, that powerful corporations or government agencies wanted him silenced. Now, let's be clear, there's absolutely no credible evidence for any of that. The investigation was thorough. The wreckage was examined extensively. Every piece of the puzzle pointed to the same conclusion: a tragic accident caused by poor planning and a dangerous design flaw. But the fact that these theories emerged at all shows you how difficult it was for people to accept that their John Denver, their voice of sunshine and optimism, could die in such a preventable way. Here's what really haunts me about this story, though. In the months before his death, John Denver had been experiencing a creative renaissance. He was writing new music. He'd reconnected with his passion for performance. Friends said he seemed happier, more at peace than he'd been in years. He was finally emerging from the darkness of his failed marriages and his struggles with alcohol. He was finding himself again. And then, just as he was climbing back toward the light gone, the truth about John Denver's death isn't a mystery in the conspiracy sense. It's a mystery in the human sense. How does a man who's flown hundreds of hours make such a catastrophic mistake? Why would someone so intelligent ignore such obvious danger signs? What was going through his mind as he climbed into that cockpit that sunny October afternoon? Maybe the real tragedy is that John Denver died the same way he lived, chasing freedom at any cost. He was never someone who played it safe. He was never someone who colored inside the lines. He lived big, loved hard, and refused to be contained by anyone else's rules. And on October 12th, 1997, that fierce independence, that desperate need to fly, literally and metaphorically, finally caught up with him. The world lost more than a singer that day. We lost a poet. We lost an advocate. We lost a reminder that life could be simple and beautiful and worth celebrating. Every time someone sings "Take Me Home," "Country Roads" at a campfire, every time Annie's song plays at a wedding, every time someone looks at a mountain and feels that inexplicable pull towards something greater, that's John Denver's legacy. Not the crash, not the mistakes, not the tragedy, the music, the message, the reminder to appreciate the beauty all around us. That's what finally uncovering this mystery teaches us. John Denver's death wasn't mysterious because of what happened. It was mysterious because of who it happened to. A man who seemed invincible, who seemed to have it all figured out, who taught us to find joy in the simple things, was just as human, just as flawed, just as vulnerable as the rest of us. So that's the real story, the full story, the story that Hollywood and the music industry try to simplify into just tragic accident, but was really so much more complex and heartbreaking than that. If this story moved you, if it gave you a new perspective on John Denver and the price of fame and freedom, go ahead and hit that like button. Drop a comment below and tell me, do you think John Denver's death could have been prevented, or was this tragedy somehow inevitable for a man who lived the way he did? I genuinely want to hear your thoughts on this. And if you're new here to StarWire Daily, we dive deep into the untold stories of Hollywood's biggest legends every single week. The scandals they try to bury, the secrets they never wanted revealed, the human stories behind the celebrity facades. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss when we uncover the next mystery. Thanks for watching, everyone. Remember, the truth is always more complicated than the headlines. And sometimes, the most tragic stories are the ones that didn't have to happen at all. Until next time, stay curious.